I'm Billy Roberts, Senior Economist of Food and Beverage with Knowledge Exchange here at CoBank. With me today are Chris Dubois, EVP of Fresh Protein with Circana, and Brian Earnest, Lead Animal Protein Analyst at CoBank's Knowledge Exchange Division. As Paul mentioned, happy Halloween. I hope consumers are kind of getting over the sticker shock of those higher candy prices this year. And I want to turn it over to Chris to kind of see where we see consumers going with like other holiday participation throughout the rest of the year. So Chris, I turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Billy. I appreciate being here and thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be back. As we talk about some of the early Thanksgiving looks, I'll walk everybody through where we are in the meat industry so far, about three quarters through, but also a very good look at what's happened in Thanksgivings in the past. And one of the reasons that some people may be asked, one of the reasons or one of the themes from last year that's picked up, and it's been a couple of years in a row, there's been what I would call a disturbance in the force. Now, I know Billy's a huge Star Wars fan. If you look behind him to the left, his left, there's actually lightsabers and things back there.
Yeah.
But, as someone who kind of sees across all the different markets, there are nuances going on. So one of the big things coming out was the idea of dual proteins or even proteins that weren't poultry. So I know not all tricky processors want to hear that. But one of the things coming up underneath were different generations. So that's the reason for the beef on top here, just in case anybody was wondering, did I totally forget that Thanksgiving is turkey? And the answer is nope, didn't forget. There's just other things that are out there to keep an eye on over the next, say, 5 years. So, but let's kind of get into it a little bit in terms of where's the consumer hitting. And if we kind of go to the next page, the number one thing is it's really been inflation kind of hitting it. But it's not inflation's bad and the world's ending and, oh my God, consumers are not ever going to buy again. The answer is yes, consumers are feeling that pressure on food, and it is real. But what we're seeing more and more is that they're seeing the price increases despite, or they're perceiving the price increase to be there despite a lot of the average retails coming down. So a lot of times consumer reality lags where pricing is. So I know if you wanted to go talk to chicken processors, they'd say, wow, chicken's as cheap as it's been. Yeah. If you go back to the 20 teens, 2015, 16, we're roughly about the same prices. So it's not that every price in the meat case is high, every price in the store. It's the collective price increases that have happened over time. So that's where the pressure is. But if you look at where things are in the meat case, prices are higher, but they're not that dramatically high, that much more dramatically higher than a lot of other things here in the U.S. economy. Moving into the next page kind of gives you a little different feel in terms of kind of why that is and how consumers are adjusting. So if you go back in time, say to 2019, food service is pulling more from the dollars and more from meals. Right now, 86% of meals are sourced from home. And actually, I think if we kind of crank out the numbers, that for the quarter that closed out in September, we're probably going to start running into the 87, 88s. So more and more meals are being sourced from home, more people are cooking at home. Part of that's the pressure from food service costs going up. The other one is just more of, it's not just about food in the grocery store or in restaurants, it's car insurance costs, it's health club memberships, it's haircuts, it's everything that kind of hits out there. And people make adjustments through their lives. But what's been a huge benefit for a lot of both food manufacturers as well as food retailers is food at home continues to be a real bastion of strength. And that hits not only in breakfast, lunch, but also dinner. And if you look across food service and retail, this is sort of our breakdown of how we look at things here at Circana, because we do see sales from big food distributors, we see sales from food restaurant chains, but we also see, of course, all the supermarkets, mass merch, and club stores. So we see every item sold every day across those channels. And what we're seeing is continued strength in retail at home or food at home, continued growth over the last quarter. What we're seeing is some of the pressure from higher prices coming in, and sales have been slower away from home, and which isn't a surprise when you see what's gone on in the press and how other companies are reacting. You're seeing a lot of pressure in the fast casual type retail. Quick serve has been reasonably strong, but that pressure of food away from home has been tough. But dollar trends continue to improve for retail again and again.
Yeah, Chris, we actually have a question about that from the audience. With beef prices high and volumes holding up at retail, what kind of things would cause a drop in volumes for beef, and can that strength really be expected to continue?
Yeah, beef has just been a powerhouse. So if you've had to think about what happens when prices go up, most of the economists in the room, in fact, I'm sort of looking at Brian because I'm sure his head's about to explode of all the things he's learned over the years of supply and demand. This just makes economists' heads explode. If you can't keep raising prices and have sales keep going up, like that just doesn't happen in most worlds. But so beef's been really advantaged. To me, the thing that changes it is just it'll be a major change in unemployment or a major change in retail spending. Retail spending tends to, if you think of Johnson Red Book spending, for example, not just Circana food spending. Think more Johnson Red Book spending. That's been on a continued push up. So not only are people bringing in money, but they're spending. So unemployment to me is probably going to be the one that kind of causes it. So if we get a recession that drops unemployment or pushes up unemployment 1 or 2 points, that's going to be the big reset. So, or if you see beef processors or whoever is setting prices in the marketplace, if you see another dollar put on top of a pound of ground beef, that's probably going to cause the problem. In fact, I think we're sort of at the top of where I'd call it the price thresholds in many cases. But great question. So this kind of gives you a sense of what's going on in the food world overall, in terms of food at home, food away from home. But food at home continues to be strong, both growth-wise and volume-wise and dollar-wise. So moving into the next page, this to me is probably one of the most important slides I look at. So if you had to say, Chris, you look at I can't even get into like how big the data sets are. And if you had to go into like petabytes and stuff, it's not even just terabytes and et cetera. They're way beyond. But what really matters? So to me, what's driving the food service cost gap and what's driving the retail piece, it's really all about the cost of a meal and what happens. So if you think of that gap between $8.26 for eating out versus $1.91 at home, that gap is really, really big. As you can see, it's been increasing. So this is a pain that I think all of us are kind of looking at. If you go to McDonald's, like, it's not cheap. If I go out to Panera, it's not cheap. So it's that same pressure where, we all feel it. But it's that gap is something that this one matters. When you start seeing this turn a little bit, this is the fulcrum graph. In other words, if I had to look at 5 graphs the rest of my career here at Circana, I'd probably want this to be one of them in terms of where the markets are going. So into the next page, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Chris. I'm just curious. So that great discrepancy between food service expenditures and retail grocery expenditures. So we're still seeing some pretty strong earnings from kind of full service restaurants. Longhorn Steakhouse, Texas Roadhouse have reported pretty strong growth for the past several quarters, if not longer. Do you think consumers are just being more selective with their restaurant dollar, or is there something else going on?
Consumers are being more selective. If you look across the full spectrum, there are chains that have really struggled. And some of those have hit bankruptcy, whether it's Red Lobster or other ones. Some of it comes down to that ability to kind of change menus. So a lot of times you're seeing menus trimming down in many ways, or you'll see proteins being substituted. So the Chicken Big Mac was not just a random experiment. That's a way of substituting different proteins in that kind of drive a better cost of goods in a sense.
Yep.
So more and more you're going to see chicken being substituted for beef in food service. So there's lots of ways to make what I would say how to make numbers if you're a food service operator. We don't get to see all of them, but we can share some of the things that we're seeing in the data sets in the next couple. And this is just another way of sort of how I would say food service operators are pretty savvy. So here are some secrets of kind of what goes on behind the scenes of how they get to those good earnings numbers. So if we go to the next page, I guess this will set up one other big change here coming. This is also, this looks across all the different spectrums. So when we kind of look at consumers and how they eat, we have a set of consumers that share in detail not only when they ate, what they ate, who was with them, but also all the foods in it. So yes, there are. I know it's amazing to think that there are people that write that stuff down, but they are usually happy to share it, and it's a big part of learning. But when you look at how dinner's changed, one of the big things is this convenience spectrum. It's shifting far to the left. Most dinners take very little time to prepare. So if you're in the meat world or if you're in the food service world, that ability to create much more faster, convenient prep dinners really matters because you can get to 60% of dinners take very little time to prep. What we're seeing in the invested dinner side is there's still much more interest from the millennial space. Younger families are experimenting using technology to drive more restaurant meals at home, but part of that's because they're younger and putting together more entertainment options at home as they have younger kids with other families coming over. So there's a shift in the spectrum, but that push towards more convenient meals really matters for dinners at home. Moving into the next page, one of the big themes at home, and then we'll start going to some of the food service pages, is this theme emerged probably late COVID, I would say, just right around when the shots were coming out, probably in 21. The idea of restaurant meals at home was probably the first time I'd heard that vocalized in a very big, meaningful way, that people were actively trying to recreate restaurant meals because at that time, restaurants were either shut down for a while or slow in coming back up. So that idea of how to create that restaurant meal, be able to take something from take something very special and bring it back, made perfect sense. So it could be something as simple as making a grilled steak salad. So if you ask me how you make a salad, the answer is, well, you just throw a bunch of random vegetables, whatever we have in the fridge, and pour it all in a bowl, and there we go, right? That's a salad. Let's move on. Other people, more creative, would probably think, wow, I could grill a steak or grill a fish and integrate some different vegetables and pick them and maybe even grill the vegetables. Now, that doesn't compute in my mind, but if you kind of look at what people are doing, that may constitute a restaurant meal. Like I'll have a gourmet salad, or I'll put a layer of mozzarella cheese in the sandwich instead of just making something quick at home, or looking at pork chops as with marinades and herbs that they picked up off of a restaurant menu and took some pictures and brought that home. So the idea of restaurant meals at home is a really big marketing event for me, at least for a retailer side. If we move into the next page here, one of the ways, and Billy talked about it, is food service operators are really savvy. They will find ways to save money. So despite labor costs going through the roof, despite all the other cost of goods happening, one of the ways that they're trying to save the labor is using more pre-cooked protein. So when we see what's going on behind the scenes on menus, a lot of this is coming in either par-cooked or sometimes pre-cooked. And what does that do? It saves time, gets meals on the table faster, lets the tables turn, etc. We go into the next page, but this kind of breaks it down in a little bit more detail in terms of some of the things that we're seeing in terms of cost-saving solutions. Some of it just means that you've got central kitchens doing more pre-sliced foods out there. So instead of just selling plain commodities in, now having shredded chicken, for example, instead of shredding the chicken in the restaurant, we're seeing volumes up 48%, pre-cooked in chicken. Again, a pretty big. Chicken tenders, big again. Chicken's been replacing beef in a lot of different places, but one of the sneaky things is if you look around, your chicken tenders may be just a little smaller than you thought they were, and maybe there's just a little bit more breading. Not naming names, not calling out restaurant operators, but things you might see behind the scenes of kind of what's moving on the portion size, for example. So food service operators are trying to adjust into this. It's just a tough world when prices are that high. But moving into the next page, and it gives you at least a little different look in terms of a deeper dive. I'm going to give you a little bit deeper dive into retail, just to kind of get a sense of where are we before we go into Thanksgiving, and how are we setting up. So if we kind of think about the meat industry, at least overall, the meat department's had based on the mix, but 33% higher price per pound. If you look across from 2020, we've had a pretty good price increases all the way, but for the most part, what you're looking at here in the chart is simply just price increases in general. Price per volume is how we think about it. So there's a mix element in there, meaning beef has been pretty strong, but overall the last couple of years, the total inflation's kind of moderated. So the inflation from 2021 to 22, where people really felt it, has moderated a bit. And I think that's kind of what's setting up pretty well for the rest of the next couple of years, most likely. But moving into the next page, this is kind of where we're at is despite the fact that, again, if we saw price increases going up, you'd expect volumes to fall at least a little bit. For example, the beef complex, we continue to see prices higher, but dollars are up, partially because of price per volume or price increases. The pounds continue to go up. Beef has been very strong. Chicken's been strong. And we're pretty good across the board. It's more in terms of the exotics where we struggled, or pork is still, I think, moving along at a reasonably steady state, but not growing as much. But between beef and chicken, those tend to be have just emerged as powerhouses, and we're seeing continued growth. So what's been great about 2024 is this return to volume. In other words, the last couple of years we've seen volume flat to down, and now we're just seeing renewed strength, and that's been wonderful for the agriculture industry. As we go into the next a little bit deeper dive, here's a few little bit more detail in terms of what's kind of gone on from the price increases. You can begin to see meat department sales. Right now, we just broke through basically if you look at the last 52 weeks, $100 billion at U.S. retail. And we're seeing continued growth in pounds. And that's despite a pretty good average price per unit. Meaning, again, there's a mix component in there, but our prices are, the volume's up a little bit as well. So price per unit is still about $7.10 an item, which reflects a lot of the beef pricing, but up about 3.4%. So to me, this shows, one, volume's been growing despite price increases. And it sets up for a pretty strong everyday holiday and everyday demand and holiday demand. The word we use a lot, or the word I use a lot, is home-centric. So when you're home-centric and most of your meals are at home, spending a little bit more money on a really good dish or dinner, whether it's Saturday, midweek, all that becomes a little less important when you think of, well, my choice is I'm going to go out and spend $120 for a family of four, or I could spend $20 for a family of four and have a great meal at home. Spending that $20, yes, it's kind of sort of a lot compared to what I might do on some days, but it's that comparison to out of home or to something else. It becomes sort of a way of having a great time, but not, and rewarding yourself, but also not, call it overspending versus a budget. So that's how I kind of think about the price increases are there and the volumes are there, but that's the reason why the sales are there. Moving into the next page, this gives you a view of kind of the top 10, some of the big subcategories. And ground beef is, again, sort of driving this. If you think about the ground beef complex alone, it's $15 billion here in the U.S. Dollar sales up almost 9%. And that's with price increases of 6.7%. So if you look to the far right, you can begin to see it. And again, normally most economists, and I'd say maybe I'm just a bachelor's economist, so maybe it doesn't count. But my reaction would have been, if you told me I'm going to raise ground beef prices 6.7%, I wouldn't have guessed you're going to see volume growth at that point. I honestly wouldn't with prices as high as they are. But the industry's put on a great product, that's based off of really solid genetics, and basically you're seeing people buy it, both out of convenience and because they can make a ton of different dishes, both from the taste and texture, but the power of this product, it's hard to find a similar product across the grocery store. And I mean detergents, sodas, snacks, cereals, anything. Walk across a grocery store, you won't find a department that's doing as well as meat with the kind of pricing and volume response. So it's a tremendous, I think it reflects really well on the industry as a whole, that you're seeing strength across the board in volumes for the most part across the big categories. So moving into the next page takes it just a little bit deeper into some of the things that have been driving it. And grinds to me has been an absolute powerhouse over the last 5 years. I think this caught my eye in 2020 because I thought, well, maybe people are just throwing it in the freezer and who knows, and it's a one-time bump. But all we've seen is every year the grind complex, and I call it the complex just because it means beef, chicken, turkey, pork, and others. All this does is go up. So if I kind of think about it, it almost doesn't matter the protein. We're up in pounds and for the most part, and up in dollars. So what's going on? Because if you looked at this again, you'd say, how can everything be up? Like the world, every grind is up? And the answer is it's been that way for a while. But one, it's been about convenience. It lets people buy 2 or 3 pounds and then freeze some, use some, or save some, or use some in one package for one dish and use again maybe the other part of the package for another dish. So the convenience aspect, quick cooking, really matters. But what's really driving as we got underneath it is that the younger generations, Millennial and Gen Z in particular, are using these in different kinds of dishes going forward. So the younger generations are buying it in greater quantities than we've seen in the past. So as a result, you'd wonder, like, gosh, is this the top? Can it get any bigger than this? And the answer from what we're seeing from the consumer set is it's likely it's going to continue to grow. Only because we've seen the power of younger buyers kind of pushing into this and buying a lot of it. So this to me is one of the standouts in the entire department. It just continues to be a powerhouse. If we move into the next slide. Oh, go ahead, Bill.
I was going to quickly just kind of note out, I didn't realize ground turkey was, we're talking $2 billion versus ground pork even 224. It's a pretty big disparity. For that ground pork, we're talking largely like breakfast type items, right? For that, or in that category?
Yeah, I'd say I give the pork industry a ton of credit because this product's grown, even though it's only 224 now. It's grown a ton in the last 5 years, and they've really tried to turn this into much more of a dinner piece, because I normally would think of it as a breakfast piece, being of a certain age that you can't tell from the bald head or anything else like that. What we've seen is like they've had some really famous recipes too, whether it's egg roll in a bowl or I think just finding different uses for it, but it's really picked up extremely well with millennials. So if you look at kind of who buys it, it's less of the boomer and Gen X to some degree. It leans much stronger to the younger generation. That fits really well in that quick meal prep bowl usage, mixed with other vegetables or rice or other kinds of foods. So ground pork to me is one of those growth stories that it is a little small, but it's been a big victory from the pork side. I always kind of hold it out as like, this is a great way to show the innovation in the category. In the last couple of years, they've worked to standardize packaging, get fat content, labeled so it's competitive with turkey and beef and others. So they've turned it into a real everyday product you can find on the shelf. But ground turkey, is $2 billion on that side, and it continues to grow. That's been probably the stellar part of the turkey industry as well. Like it just continues to grow, and part of it's the idea of convenience, packaging, and usage that kind of hits, but also that ability to connect to younger consumers. So
Good insight.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And if you look at processed meat, it's a little bit more mixed, whereas fresh meat's been pretty strongly up. Here you get a little bit more of the what I call the ups and downs. So if you look at packaged lunch meat, struggling a little bit in the near term from some of the deli meat overhang, I think, from some of the recalls done. Bacon's been moving right up and pushing up against kind of that $7 billion mark. But this is much more of a pricing story. Pricing in the processed meats really, really matters to get that right. Well, if you take a look at the next page, you'll begin to kind of see why some things are working. So the pricing side becomes a really, really big deal. If I think about the pricing adjustments made, so this is kind of looking at the lower level price per volume change. So what happens when price declines? In some cases, you're seeing some of the natural movements. Bacon tends to be pretty tight, at least in terms of the discipline. But getting pricing right is a really, really big deal. So using the analytics, using the tools is a key part of how to kind of grow these categories overall. Whereas in some cases, like we saw in grinds, like if you raise the price, you still sell more. It's a little less baffling in this piece in terms of kind of what's working and why. Dinner sausage, another good example of prices being managed, mix being managed, and still kind of growing volume up there. On the next page, we kind of go a little bit in terms of the deli meat. I just touched on it. I won't go deep into it because the recall, still, I think the impact of the recall from earlier this year is still sort of being felt, but it's put a big dent in the lunch meat deli world. You're seeing volumes sort of come down and decline. In the deli service case in particular, it's really kind of hit home. If you look at the service part only, not grab and go, meaning pre-sliced and in a package, it's we've been down 5-10% pretty consistently for a little bit. But the impact was there, and pounds took a big hit in August. And I think it's going to take a little bit to recover. But that gives you at least a good feel of some of the impact of what's happened over time. We move into the next page. I can start to give you now a good feel of what's happening for Thanksgiving 24 now. Sometimes the best way to do it is sort of take a hard look at what last year did and even what to expect. So if I go back to the power of meat and some of the information Anne-Marie Robrink shared back there, we track a lot of things with her. And, if you look at holiday time, it becomes a time to splurge. This is a time to kind of let go. So as you think about where the consumer is, unemployment's relatively low. Spending continues to be strong, and food at home continues to be a place where people are spending. This kind of gets to the psychology of kind of why you expect people to spend kind of going in, and we kind of see that strength. If we kind of move into the next page behind it, what we're seeing here is Thanksgiving, not a surprise, is still the second largest holiday of the year, but it's a bit different than Christmas. So if you look at the right side, $2 billion came in basically for the uplift versus average weekly sales for Thanksgiving. So that's a big deal if you think of just a week, but it's about a third of what you get for Christmas. And that's going back to 22 when we did the holiday uplift. So Thanksgiving is a big, big deal, but it's much more point specific and category specific. And then Thanksgiving becomes almost a 30% lift. That's how you kind of read that versus, say, July 4th and Easter combined. This gives you at least a good feel of some of the historical impacts, Christmas, Thanksgiving, July 4th, and Easter, all the way through. But again, continued growth and strength. So for the most part, I would expect it to be reasonably strong. Going into the next page, there's about, when you look at Thanksgiving, it really kind of comes down to 2 weeks. A lot of times you're going to see the sales start early, and God bless the retailer. I mean, at the end of the day, for getting it started early, because, sort of looking at Brian here, but like, if I buy candy more than 3 weeks out, that's not Halloween candy. That's eat it now candy, and then I'll have to buy it again later. So Thanksgiving sales probably start the same thing with let's get people started on the mashed potatoes. And oh, by the way, they'll have to rebuy it, as we get closer because they're going to use it.
Yeah, I believe a couple of retailers, Aldi in particular, has announced, already announced what their Thanksgiving prices are going to be, offering, I think it's like a 10 family meal or 10-person meal for like $47, I think Aldi is. So really focusing on that value-oriented consumer, but delivering value in the process.
Yeah, and the way they packaged it and the way they sent it was really, really strong. So I know because we work with them, and they're included in the data sets. Like that's going to be a very big bump and a very big read this year. So you
Agreed.
can tell them, coming out of the gate of that they wanted to be the place that people go. So that idea of sort of setting the tone and setting the message really works because the sales lift is a big deal, and it comes out of those just a handful of categories. So if you think of the food supermarket, that's a couple hundred very meaningful categories. So 30s, small, saying this is kind of where all the magic happens. If you go into the next slide, you can begin to see, just what really matters. So the prior week and the week of Thanksgiving. So this is really kind of coming down to when you think of the billions, the couple of $1 billion that's really at stake, it all kind of comes down to these 2 weeks. So if you think the whole lift matters. So if the walk up and where you want to spend the dollars from a promotion side now really matters. In other words, manufacturers should be willing to pay more and discount more those 2 weeks right before. And most main dish purchases very, very prominent the week prior to Thanksgiving. If you kind of think about when do people buy the turkey, it's right in that slot. So as you're watching prices, take a good look at this. This kind of gives you a good view of kind of what the average lift is for certain items. If you look at sides, for example, for the prior week lift and the Thanksgiving week lifts, you're looking at big jumps of almost 300% over average weekly volume. Same thing for pies, beverages kind of move, but the main entree, turkey, whole bird turkey or ham or beef, whatever's on the docket. Again, really big lifts coming through. So God bless all the retailers who are trying to guess what the number is going to be for the order. And I hope they got it right. But at the end of the day, I mean, these are big monster jumps that make it hard to even keep items stocked, especially in the meat case. And then as you kind of go for the, what happens again, for the prior week before, you can kind of look at sweet potatoes, perimeter pies, canned green beans. We could walk down all that, but you can begin to see, the kind of lifts and the change versus year ago. So last year we saw very good increases in some of the big categories year over year. So I would expect something to be very, very similar this year. So if you kind of do a snapshot and sort of call it a month and a half when we kind of get all the results in from Thanksgiving, I would expect numbers to look kind of similar to this change per year ago coming through. So, and with that gets us to a poll question. Or Paul, do you want to handle that?
I'm afraid the poll questions may not be operating for us. I think we're going to transition over into Brian. And just a reminder before you get going, Brian, please feel free to post questions to our panelists in the chat box off to the bottom right. Happy to ask those questions and try to answer them if we can. And in the meantime, please continue, Brian. Looking forward to your producer holiday preparations presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. As we kind of enter the season of thanks and thinking about Thanksgiving, kind of thought this was an appropriate time to take a look at what we're seeing out of the consumer this year and last year. And Chris, I really appreciate all your insight and data you share with us. It's incredibly valuable. And, one of those questions I have as an economist is what is the consumer doing? So having that is, like I said, very valuable. A lot of what I'm looking at typically kind of day to day is more the supply side and what drives the market. Economists typically don't talk about or don't use the word consumption. They use the word disappearance, right? And they assume that if there's supply, it's disappearance at the end of the day. But there's a real fine art to this holiday season, and getting that formulation right, and it's almost mission critical for a lot of retailers, right? So appreciate that insight. Thinking about where we're at this year, I thought maybe it'd be worthwhile to take a look at what was going on last year. The conversation over the last 2 years has been about inflation. This is from the Farm Bureau. They put together the survey of different items that go into the offering for Thanksgiving dinner. And they noted that last year turkeys were down, almost 6%. For what the consumer was seeing at retail, whipping cream down 23%. So, we saw prices at the consumer level were kind of coming off of those highs that we saw in 22. Maybe there was some opportunity there for retailers to show, better price points coming into the holiday season. And I think there's opportunity for that again this year on some of the animal protein items. Maybe not necessarily all, but at least I think the target of retailers probably leading into the season is to get, to get that mindset back that like the consumer has been battling this inflation pretty heavily, as Chris noted elsewhere, and make sure where they can see opportunity for savings, they're able to realize it. I wanted to start off talking about what is traditionally the center of the plate for Thanksgiving holiday, and that's turkeys. And, typically the average consumer is kind of only thinking about turkey once a year, right? This is kind of the big moment for turkey to shine. And there's been some difficulty in terms of consumption patterns over the last couple of years. And part of that is, as Chris mentioned, folks are putting, alternatives on the plate for Thanksgiving and kind of cutting into what has traditionally been typically just at one side of the plate, animal protein. What we're seeing from a production standpoint, I wanted to back it up to the front end supply, and this is looking at poult placements. We are at, if I extended us back into the 1980s, we're at 30 plus year lows in terms of those front end intentions that the turkey producers have put on the ground this year. Those poult placements down year over year as well. So part of that is signaling coming out of last year. There's a couple other factors at play. High path AI has heavily impacted the turkey industry over the last couple of years. There's also this avian metapneumovirus that has impacted turkey supply as well. But overall, it all kind of stems to if you don't have the birds on the ground, where's the turkey going to come from? So tighter supplies this year. And when I think about production, this year, year to date, I pulled the numbers for the harvest levels. We're down 13 million head year to date from where we were in 2023. So overall, the harvest level down this year. But on the flip side of that, we're seeing average live weight higher and higher than what we were the 5-year average. So some of that offset in harvest is being made up with larger birds, not entirely, but, as you can see, production level here down 6% year over year, year to date. So overall, despite having larger birds, we're not necessarily offsetting that gap in the turkey supply. The other thing I'd point to here was 2023 was actually an up year versus 22. So we had more supply. The turkey producer was getting higher prices. They were trying to offset some of that higher production costs that they were seeing. The market somewhat favorable to that, but overall, this year I think we could anticipate that we're seeing that turkey availability is still down, and I think it'll probably show up more in whole birds because the whole bird portion of turkey production is typically smaller birds than what we're seeing in like deli meats and the further processed segment. So, from a price environment, so kind of my introduction to the poultry industry was working as a buyer for a larger grocery store co-op, and this was back 15 years ago. I was kind of looking at. I came into the job in February, and amazed at how many purchase orders we were putting in for Thanksgiving turkeys like that early in the year. The majority of the negotiation and purchasing decisions for Thanksgiving are made well in advance of the holiday, right? Chris was pointing out that, it's really a 2-week window we're talking about for Thanksgiving, and they're preparing all year round. So this I took a look at average wholesale turkey prices in January versus what the producers' cost was over the last 12 months. So looking at this in 2019, for instance, wholesale value is just above 80 cents a pound. The producer cost for the last 12 months to produce that turkey, somewhere around, or the PPI was somewhere around a 155. And these two things usually kind of match up pretty well, and it's more around a six-month average for that. But through 2021, relatively flat in terms of the turkey prices we're seeing, and you can see that drastic increase that occurred from during 22 and 23. We saw a peak, right around $1.70 a pound for wholesale turkey prices. I think that was difficult for the retailers to try and figure out promotional activity. And as a result, we saw some maybe more creative future activity last year for turkeys. This year, as you can see, the wholesale price is kind of back down to that average we saw prior to 2020. Overall, I think the takeaway on this is an expectation that the retailer has more to work with for the turkeys at the shelf this year. That being said, we showed you the production challenges coming through for turkey producers and overall supplies. It's showing up in the cold storage numbers that we're seeing. Turkeys in cold storage, and this is looking at combined of hens and toms in storage at peak around August, just over 220 million pounds. So we're starting to see those inventories make their way to the shelves, but look, we're well below what we were seeing in the peak of the 5-year average back in 2019, down 86 million pounds from that time frame.
So Brian, quick question from chat. Turkey inventories appear to be on a downward trend. Do you anticipate that we'll continue to see tighter supplies in years ahead? And can the industry do something to encourage more year-round turkey consumption to offset that decline?
Yeah, it's a good question. Something I've kind of been thinking about, and Chris and I were talking about this a couple months back too, thinking about where else are you seeing turkey? There's promotional activity going on in the industry, kind of to get more of a kind of a year-round feel for turkey, and you're seeing more creative, I think, creativity out of some of the associations to put turkey on the plate more frequently. And one of those is turkey smoke, so smoked turkey and smoking in general. I've got another chart looking at how popular pellet grills have become over the years since 2020, and turkey has been one of those items that does very well there. So I think maybe there's opportunity there for the consumer to eat this particular animal protein more year round. And I think that the creativity probably needs to be embedded in the production scene side as well. So we'll see. You
only hear about fried turkey around this time of year. Yeah.
Yeah, be careful out there too if you're using that method. Sure. So moving on to the pork side of it. So I know pork has kind of come in, over the last decade or so as somewhat of an alternative. So, some folks don't want to cook a big turkey. They may still want the flavor, the tradition of turkey around Thanksgiving, but may want something else as an offering. The retailer has kind of adjusted to this mindset too, and we're seeing more promotional activity around hams, more bone-in hams in spiral cut for Thanksgiving showing up as well. And typically those promotions kind of act like if you buy a turkey breast, we'll give you a free ham or a certain amount of groceries. So they're kind of addressing the consumer desire to have variety on the plate year round, and allowing that for Thanksgiving and bigger gatherings as well. This year, you can see here that so the inventorying for hams for the holiday season typically starts kind of in that first quarter of the year. Works its way to peak in August, September. Typically, similar to what we see for turkeys. And this year we started at some very low levels in terms of hams and cold storage, and built over the summer, but we didn't really see overall storage levels kind of build to those 5-year peaks. So not necessarily tight inventories, but not expanding overall supply there either. From a price standpoint, hams, I think part of this as well started out the year in sort of a firm price situation. As I said, most of that negotiation and preparation for Thanksgiving for hams takes place at a little bit different time frame in the year. It's kind of more the second quarter. And we saw some higher prices come in during April this year. Part of this, I think, was that start of a firm price environment to start the year. Some buyers kind of held off, and it's contributing to some folks kind of mid-year thinking, well, I better think more seriously about the supply that I have available. So it led to some substantial premiums coming in kind of in that July-August timeframe this year for hams. So overall, seen a pretty good support coming back to the producer this year. So thinking about those forward sales, overall, kind of that time frame where we're typically seeing that that activity or the preparations for Thanksgiving come into play. This year, advanced sales, they were up above where they were last year and the year before. And as you can see, that price point higher as well for wholesale value. So, I think that kept people kind of, away from the bargaining table this year. So, stalled out overall ham sales. So, moving over to the beef side of it, beef has been something that's kind of come to the Thanksgiving table as well in recent years. More on the roast item, rib type item. Availability down this year. Overall pounds produced. Not necessarily the drastic decline that we were anticipating this year. A lot of economists looking for beef production and availability down rather significantly this year, but offsetting that has been higher average live weights coming out of the harvest levels or the cattle slaughter levels. I think the September number, we were up about 40 pounds per animal in terms of harvest this year. So, overall, that's adding to meaningful beef production. In terms of the availability of those subprimals, you're thinking about your prime rib offering, your standing rib roast, maybe heavier items, but not necessarily as many as we've seen in the past. Chris mentioned the strong gravitation towards beef, and I put this slide on a different presentation I made earlier this week. And, I got to think of a couple different things on the beef demand situation, which I keep hearing folks say the word exceptional when they're talking about beef demand. And it really has been that. Part of that has been the quality beef that's in the system. This is kind of, sectioning out the different grade categories. Looking at prime beef, you've got somewhere around 2 billion pounds produced this year. You look back to, they're early to mid 2000s, we were less than half of that, right? So, and choice as well, up well above what we were seeing in years past. The consumer knows that they can buy a really high quality beef item, even at their local grocery store. They don't necessarily have to go to a butcher to get this or a high-end restaurant. So, overall, I think that continues to contribute to overall beef demand. The price environment too, from a beef side, I think it'll be a little bit more difficult for retailers to show the consumer value on the beef side. So they will be leaning on that quality to entice sales this year. But overall, I think that rib primal is probably the one we're looking at here in the fourth quarter of the year. And boy, it's been very difficult for the market to be able to reconcile those tighter supplies that we're seeing this year. So briefly on eggs, thinking about the production, this is another item that, whenever the news media outlets are talking about inflation, it's usually like the price of gas and the price of a dozen eggs, right? This is one of those staple items that we keep coming back to. It gets a big lift in the tail end of the year. People are baking more. They're eating more breakfast at home as well. The bakeries are cooking more pies and cakes and that sort of thing to prepare for what the consumer desires. They're eating more desserts and that sort of thing at home. They're picking up pies for Thanksgiving. We've got tight supplies this year, and the big story there is high path avian influenza. and how that has impacted the overall layer flock. And we're in terms of the overall supply situation, we are in a tighter situation that we've seen in the past. And so I took a look at July through September production, so 2024, 23.25 billion eggs produced. Gosh, it's a massive amount, right? It's a huge number, but well below almost a billion egg fewer for the same period. So that's the previous 3 months than what we were in 2019. So you take a billion eggs out of the system, and it's going to have a price impact. So on the news on bird flu, avian influenza has been relatively quiet on the egg producer side here in recent months, but it hasn't gone away. It's still in the flocks and still impacting supply. We had some active months earlier this year, and it contributed a lot of supply disappearance or lack of availability in some of these western states, and a lot of those are cage-free. From a price environment standpoint, the wholesale prices for eggs, has been remarkably higher this year than what we typically see. That the consumer is seeing that as well, tighter supply situation. But I wanted to kind of look at feature prices as well. So the chart on the right here is looking at the weekly feature egg prices. This is for a dozen grade A large eggs. It's been that the feature price has been premium versus year ago in most weeks, but not all. But certainly in this time frame, still seeing a premium there. So. And part of that is this transition that we're seeing towards cage-free. There's a much larger portion of the overall supply stream that is now in cage-free production than what we saw in the past. We're seeing a pretty big conversion in the industry towards more cage-free production. With that, I think we've maybe got a couple more minutes if we did get any questions. And I heard that.
Yeah, Brian, sorry to say, I'm afraid we're having a bit of technical difficulties with our chat feature. So I apologize to participants unable to ask questions. But if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them to either Chris or Brian via email. You can see their emails there on the screen. I will be happy to answer any that we can. Chris, Brian, thank you so much for participating. Really enjoyable presentation, really informative. And certainly to the audience, thank you for joining us. Certainly wish you all a happy Halloween, and thanks to Paul, our technical coordinator, who, thanks to technical difficulties, this will definitely be a webinar that he won't soon forget.